Welcome to the Well Woman Show, where we interview women executives, leaders, and entrepreneurs.
And you're listening to the Well Woman Show,
where motivated women achieve fulfillment and well-being.
You're listening to the Well Woman Show.
Take time for myself by coming to things like Well Woman drinks.
To be accepting of myself no matter what. Step away from judgment as much as possible.
You're listening to the Well Woman Show.
You're going to be in for a good ride. I don't regret anything. Everything I've ever done, I've learned from it, one way or another, good or bad.
Being a little bit selfish for yourself, put your own oxygen mask on first and then give what's left.
I'm a woman. I would prefer to tell my own story. My story, though it's very personal, is universal.
You're listening to the Well Woman Show. And now your host, Giovanna Rossi.
Hi, Giovanna Rossi here, and welcome to another episode of The Well Woman Show, where I interview women leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs about their lives and their road to becoming and being who they are today. Are you at the top of your game professionally, but feeling burned out? Or finding it hard to focus on your goals? Or unfulfilled personally? Or are you in transition, simply juggling so many things you find it hard to take care of your own needs? Well, you're not alone. We all need to activate the 4 universal superpowers. These are the internal strengths and abilities we all already have but don't use all the time. Superpowers can be cultivated, and they include awareness, intuition, action, and acceptance. Toward the end of the show, in a segment called Superpowers for Success, I ask my guest about her superpowers, and the answers will give you the strength, perspective, and power to live a well woman life. I'm so happy you're here, so thanks for tuning in. This episode of The Well Woman Show is brought to you by Collective Action Strategies, supporting organizations that support women and families, and by Well Woman Life Movement Challenge Quiz, your resource for living your best life. If you're in burnout or major transition, this is your time to figure out what's holding you back from making the changes you need to make in order to live your fullest, most joyful life. The cause of all of our challenges, personal or professional, can actually be rooted in the lack of internal superpowers and/or external supports. Our Well Woman Life framework tells you which stage of the Well Woman life cycle you're in and what to do about it so you can truly live your best life. You can find out more at wellwomanlife.com/quiz. I'm so thankful for support from Natural Awakenings magazine in New Mexico, a monthly green, healthy lifestyle publication, and for support from High Desert Yoga, promoting optimum physical health, clarity of mind, and spiritual inspiration for all. Hello, hello, well women everywhere. This is Giovanna. I am sitting here in my co-working space because I had to get out of the house because it's summertime all day and all night at my house right now because the kids are off school and my husband's off school. He's a teacher, and they're just like playing and goofing around all day long and all night long, which is awesome, except that I can't get any work done. So I have this fabulous little co-working space, and actually I'm the only one here right now. So there's a pretty loud cooler, so I don't know if you can hear that in the background. But I just got back from Podcast Movement, which is the biggest podcast conference in the world. There are other podcast conferences around, but I believe this is the biggest one. And I've been going to it since 2015. This year I was a speaker, so that was super fun and exciting. And for the last couple of years, I've been doing a Well Woman Drinks event. It's our signature event that we do with Well Woman Life, but I've been doing it at Podcast Movement. So that was super fun too. Met tons of awesome, badass women doing really great podcasts and great projects. So I'm back in New Mexico and just getting settled long enough to then leave again to go to Atlanta at the end of the week to go speak at the U.S. Breastfeeding Conference. So that will be fun. That'll be just a short trip, just kind of in and out to do that. I'll have the chance to see a very good old friend of mine. She's going to take me to a swanky restaurant, and we're going to dine and be merry. Anyway, I wanted to let you know that, let's see, we have our website is up and running for sales, for ticket sales for the Superpower Retreat now. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely head over to wellwomanlife.com/retreat and take a look at it. It's September 9th and 10th. We are doing a full day deep dive into your superpowers and your life and how to know which stage you're in of the Well Woman life cycle and what to do, what tools to use to move through that stage so you can get into the flow stage, which I'm sure you've all experienced, but we don't always stay in flow. We often move into burnout or transition, and it becomes really difficult to get back into flow where everything seems to, tick along and we achieve our goals and feeling good and all of that. So definitely want to share this amazing retreat with you. September 9th and 10th. We're partnering with the Business Journal here to bring you the Leadership Summit on the 10th. So you get to go to both events. It's at a beautiful venue. So check it out. wellwomanlife.com/retreats. I think it's retreats, plural. wellwomanlife.com/retreats. And today on the show, we're talking about integrating and applying traditional knowledge with Nicolle Gonzales. And Nicolle is a Navajo woman who is trained as a nurse, and she has a master's degree in nurse midwifery. She has basically been practicing traditional healing. It's been a part of her life as a Navajo. And she attributes her accomplishments to the many prayers and ceremonies done on her behalf as she was growing into the woman she is today. While obtaining her graduate education, she realized that her traditional healing practices and philosophies about quote-unquote health and wellness were really vital to the care she was providing as a nurse midwife. And so she says that it is with this deep understanding and respect for our way of life as Indigenous peoples that my worldviews are based on and are reflected in the projects I participate in. And her primary goal is, as a nurse midwife, is to keep birth sacred and in Native communities by integrating and applying traditional knowledge. So this is a fascinating conversation with Nicolle Gonzales, how she uses traditional practices in her practice as a nurse midwife, and some really amazing things she's doing in the field of nurse midwifery. So we talk a lot about supporting women to be who they are and supporting women on their own terms in this interview. And when we get to the superpowers for success, she shares some really, really deep, interesting things with the audience. So definitely want you to listen towards the end when we do the superpowers for success. And without further ado, here is my interview with Nicolle Gonzales. Welcome to the program, Nicolle.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Nicolle, as we heard in the introduction, you have many credentials as a health care provider and a nurse. Can you also introduce yourself the way that you introduce yourself in Navajo?
Yeah, I usually, when I'm visiting with my community, I would say, "She Nicolle Gonzales nishe do Tachii'nii bashishchin is gaizoi dishiche Naasht'ezhi dishinale and I live in San Ildefonso Pueblo with my husband and 3 children.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Beautiful. I wanted to start, this conversation by asking you to talk about what you are working on and how does it impact women's lives and well-being?
So I'm actually the founder and executive director for a nonprofit called Changing Woman Initiative. And we are working on the nation's first Indigenous woman-led birth center and wellness center to be built on Native American tribal land. And our hopes for this space and this building and this work that we're doing is to address a need to integrate cultural, traditional knowledge around childbirth, pregnancy, and mothering, as well as parenting. What that means is integrating language, plant medicines, ceremony songs as part of the healing process and healing journey that they're on while they're pregnant and transforming into mothers. As a midwife, I see lots of women for other women's health issues like, pap smears and well woman exams for mammograms and those sort of things. And so we're really blending this Western model of healthcare with our tradition and culture around our bodies.
Okay, and your customers are going to be Navajo, or would it be open to everybody? How is that? How does that work?
So our because there is no other place like this, there are actually 2 other birth centers in Espanola and Albuquerque, New Mexico that serve all women. Our focus is to serve Indigenous Native women, regardless of tribal affiliation or IHS location. We are focused on serving that population. However, we are open to serve all women, assuming they want to come and receive care with us.
And just for listeners, IHS is Indian Health Service, which a lot of Native Americans have coverage under. So you talked about a blended model, taking the Western medicine and blending that with Native traditions. Can you talk a little bit more about what that would look like, and how has that been done before in other areas of medicine or other things?
Right. So as a nurse midwife, I work in the hospital setting. And so I also work with women in the clinic. I see about 15 women a day on average. And so really decolonizing that process for me as a midwife and integrating our traditions and culture around care is really coming from a perspective of wellness and not pathology management. Like a lot of medicine today is about disease management. There's not a lot of prevention or integration of ceremony and plant medicines as part of that process. And so a lot of times an issue I run into in the hospital setting or in the clinic setting is I just don't have time with women to talk about their nutrition and to talk about integrating ceremony. And, what that looks like would be a thorough assessment of kind of the resources they access already or need. If they have a medicine person they go to for any type of ceremony, would be trying to engage with them to be part of their wellness and healing, or at least part of their pregnancies. And there are plant medicines that are indigenous to our communities that support our health already, but not everybody's aware of them. And so reintegrating that type of information into their care is not done in a clinical setting right now, because a lot of the clinical setting is, you get a 15-minute visit with me maybe, and there's pharmaceuticals, and of course there's guidelines about what can and can't be shared in that space. Whereas in a birth center or outside of the hospital or clinical setting, we have the opportunity to create a space where there's time to talk about those things, maybe an hour, but also really dig deep into this to individuals' kind of history around plant medicines and cultural knowledge around their bodies. Our communities each have teachings that relate to our culture as women and how we live today with our land and our communities. And so going back to those teachings and those ways of life is kind of the basis of our care and what we're building it around. Historically, there's lots of information and research about our pathology, meaning hypertension, diabetes, obesity, high pregnancy rates, teen pregnancy. And so one of the factors that contribute to why those things are occurring for us is, there is a health literacy issue. So there's not a lot of explanation for things being done to us or education about medications. A lot of how we've learned has been through storytelling and talking circles. And so we're using that framework to educate women about their bodies and about their pregnancies, but looping in the traditional knowledge that's already there from their communities as a way to teach them how to be thoughtful about their pregnancies and this transformation that their body's going through.
And probably it seems to me that you would also be supporting women to access and use the knowledge they already have.
Right. So that would be part of kind of our initial engagement with them about what they know and what they have already. Obviously, we're going to serve multiple tribal, native, indigenous families, not just indigenous to New Mexico, but other communities outside of New Mexico. And the traditions around birth and pregnancy and motherhood are all somewhat different. And so we're really creating a space that even if there's things we don't know, that they can bring those elements into their care without limitations that one might have in a hospital or in a clinic setting. And that would be, time, understanding. For instance, smudging and cleaning a space with cedar, sage, or sweetgrass is a common thing that we would do before we would birth a baby. And so it's hard to do that in a hospital if there's oxygen and there's smoke, and then there's a lot of requests to bring these elements into that space. So the space that we're creating is you wouldn't necessarily have to ask permission. That would be the normal. Also, there's a lot of permissions being asked in general in a clinic hospital setting. I hear women ask to go to the bathroom. Can I get out of bed? If you're really in your birth space, you don't necessarily have to ask permission. You just get up and move as you need to. And so we're trying to create a more comfortable space for women and families so they don't have to ask permission. It's their space.
So I mean, there's a whole movement of birth, like a birthing movement. I don't know exactly what it's called, but I know I've talked to women who are really working to change some of the norms inside Western medicine. But what you're doing is even further and deeper work, which is to really bring it back to your community.
Right. And so if you think about the things that contribute to our outcomes around pregnancy and just health-wise, like as I mentioned, statistically, Native women have diabetes, hypertension, obesity. But we also have a long history of food insecurity. And so what would it look like? What would our health look like if we actually address those health issues from a community level? For instance, we're starting to work with local Native farmers to bring fresh produce to the women during their pregnancy so they can have fresh produce from their land, but also cooking education, integrating traditional diets that would prevent them from being obese and diabetic, which is a very different diet than what we have today. And so there's that integration piece, but also, naming of our body parts, our uterus, our ovaries, those are named by men of history. That's historically science. If you define or name it, then it comes after your name. But traditionally, we have Native names for our body parts. And so integrating that knowledge again so that they acknowledge their bodies as being a sacred body life and not just biology and tissue.
And so, Nicolle, how much demand for your services, is there? Because I imagine that a lot of women will really look forward to doing this. And then there might be some women who, might be fearful or something of not doing it the way that they've always been told to do it, even though that's not actually the best way.
Right. So generally, there's definitely a type of women who would access and decide to birth outside of hospital. Traditionally, Native women actually make up less than 1% of the population who access birth services outside of hospital and birth center. Part of that is cost related. The other part is like their concerns about safety. So part of the work that we're doing now is establishing the stories and the relationships with our community that, the work that we're doing is safe and would be a good thing for them. Yeah. But, there really isn't a comparison they have to what they have through Indian House Service or through a medicalized birth pregnancy journey they would get at a hospital. So there is a saying in some of the literature I read about Native women's health is, all we've ever had is Indian House Service. And so what does healthcare look like on our terms? Yeah, exactly. So where are you in the process of building the birth center, and how is that going? Like, how's the funding? When do you expect to open, and all of those kinds of details? Well, despite some of the amazing support we've gotten in the last 3 years since I started doing this work, it's an amazing amount of work. I mean, it's amazing for me to say this is groundbreaking and we're the first. But the other side of being the first is creating every part of that process leading up to the opening of the center. So one aspect is trying to train Indigenous midwives to work alongside me. I'm only one of 20 Native American nurse midwives in the whole country. Wow. And so I have to actually train another Indigenous midwife to work with me at the center. And the plan is to open a school or some sort of training fellowship so that we can increase the number of Indigenous midwives working with us, but also serving their communities. That's one. Two is we're actually in the middle of program development to serve the women on their terms, meaning we've had talking circles with 8 of the Northern Pueblo communities about birth and pregnancy, tradition and culture, plant medicines and lactation. And it's been a really good dialogue we've had with community about what their ideas of what their healthcare could look like for them, but also the work we still have to do to create a program that supports them where they're at. And so that's happening right now. There is also the challenge of building a birth center on tribal land, which is many challenges because it's government property. We still have to work with a tribe to lease the property to us and then decide on who's going to own the land versus lease it to us. We do have some backers interested in funding the building, which is going to be $7 million. But we're still working that relationship with the tribes. And the interesting thing is that the tribes that we're looking to build this place on are all in different stages of development. Some of them haven't zoned their land. Some don't have access roads. Some have water issues. And so we're really looking for a place that already has the infrastructure to manage a building like this, meaning clean water and electricity and sewage and access roads. And so it really feels like a third world project because we're having to think about all those things. And people always ask me, wouldn't it be easier just to build on private property, like Santa Fe. It certainly would, but the point of the work is to ask these questions and to do the work so that if another woman from another community would like to build a birth center on their tribal land, we kind of have the framework of how to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's one aspect of it. We still have a goal of opening in 2019 in the fall, but we're still in negotiations, introductory negotiations with several of the Northern Pueblo tribes right now about building this space on their land. The support has been really positive. Everybody wants it. It's just a matter of what's the best place for it.
Yeah. I mean, you're pulling off a major, huge project with so many different variables and players. It's really going to be impressive.
And we have different fundraising happening simultaneously for the building, for an Indigenous fellow, to even now transition. Right now I'm in transition to opening a one-day clinic in Powake, where I will see women 1 day a week, as well as transitioning to home birth. I get lots of requests from Native women in Santa Fe, Albuquerque, the Navajo Reservation, Taos, to attend their home births. I just don't have the capacity working in a hospital to do that right now. So that's in the works.
Oh, wow.
But also we are setting up an MOU to work with Esperanza Shelter in Santa Fe to provide women's health care to women in the shelters, because they're not able to access health care the same way as everybody else can.
Right.
And so we have some big projects. We're raising funds now in the next couple of months so that we can start to do the work that we have set out for us. So the end project is the birth center, but there's all this other work leading up to it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Nicolle, I want to move us on to the segment called Superpowers for Success to really talk to you about your leadership and you as a woman and as a leader. So the first question I want to ask you is, what does success in life mean for you?
Success in life for me means my community gets its needs met through the work that I'm doing.
Okay. And when did you know you were really good at what you do?
Oh, I don't think there's a defining moment that I'm like, I'm the best at what I do. I feel like the skills and the knowledge are evolving always with each encounter, each challenge. I wouldn't say I'm the best, most qualified person to do this work. I feel like our communities are full of resource experts in their own right, and I acknowledge that in them. I tend to think placing myself in an expert position is kind of a sign of patriarchy, where I'm above everybody, and I don't see myself that way.
Yeah, so maybe not seeing yourself as better than, but just when did you personally, Nicolle, feel that you were like really good at what you're doing, and which helps you build the confidence and the resources and the planning to take on what you're taking on?
I think I have a lot of faith in our community's ability to heal from trauma of the past. And because I have the skill set of a nurse midwife and I've worked in a private practice, some of that business sense that I've learned along the way can be used in a manner that would benefit my community. And so really what drives me to work so hard is knowing, again, that I'm bringing a much needed resource and a form of healthcare that is really needed. And that's really important to me.
Yeah. Okay. And then thinking about how you have so much going on. You're incredibly busy. You have a family as well. What kind of personal habits of your own contribute to your well-being?
My habits. I'm a very traditional spiritual person. I grew up with a family who prayed in a teepee. We went to powwows. We had medicine people we would go to help correct imbalances in our spiritual and mental, emotional health. So I adhered to my practice of prayer every morning with my corn pollen and my cornmeal. I smudge myself and cleanse my home. I do that with my office space, knowing all the energy that women come to clinic with. That's really what's been keeping me strong to do this work, is to be able to pray to our ancestors for the strength and the courage and the clarity to do this work, but to do so in a way that's positive and helpful and not degrading and overpowering for those that are part of the work.
And what superpower did you discover you had only to realize it was there all the time?
Belief that I could do it. Just belief in myself that it could be done.
Where do you think that comes from?
I think that comes from the many barriers and challenges I've just faced in my life as a woman, that I've had to figure out a way through the problem, around a problem, without a cheering squad sometimes, without the support that you would expect to get from loved ones. There's this self-reliance that's been instilled in me from my childhood, that's where that belief of like, you just have to do it, you can. I believe it's the same sentiment I feel with women in childbirth who just have this knowing that they can birth their babies despite the pain, despite the exhaustion.
Yeah, what is that all about?
Capability in their bodies to do it.
Yeah. I actually experienced that myself with my first birth, and but I needed my midwife to also believe in me. Like, when I knew that she knew I could do it, then I was like, oh, I can do it.
I think, if you're lucky enough to surround yourself with the people who have this unwavering belief in you, especially in childbirth, and that's why many of us women who maybe had a hard life or challenging life with family or other circumstances we have no control over, we know about this kind of unwavering belief in ourselves to overcome something very difficult. And how pulling that out of women in their most difficult times is sometimes being the very loud cheerleader at birth, or sometimes just being that silent person next to you saying, you can do this.
Yeah.
And so I think those of us maybe in leadership, learn that early on, and we become that kind of voice, not just for ourselves, but everyone who works with us, that they can do it, it's possible. I think too is there's this level of discomfort that we are comfortable with as women. I know for me, I just completed a marathon last year. Oh, wow. And it was, I could swear it's as painful as childbirth. Wow. But there was still this voice in my head that I just had to finish, that I, despite the pain and discomfort, like you just had to get there. And I feel like women pull from that part of themselves when it comes to doing difficult things, especially childbirth. And so I use that a lot to kind of push through the work that I do.
Yeah. And then what about women who you meet who really just don't, they, for some reason, cannot access that part or don't, have the tools or don't want to? So
it's about supporting them on their terms.
Yeah.
So, and that looks different for all of us. If there's a woman who feels like her body couldn't do that without pain medication, like I have and do support her decision making around her birth and her choices during childbirth. I think that's very empowering to have someone by your side or in your team, having this unwavering support no matter what decision you make. There isn't a right or wrong way to do it. It's about trusting yourself. And so if I pushed a woman to birth unmedicated and that's not what she wanted, I feel like that's building mistrust with this individual about what she's capable of. And that's not what I want.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you, what advice would you give your younger self, say 10, 15 years ago?
I would give myself advice that have the courage to stand up for yourself and make the decisions that make you happy, and don't apologize for that.
I love that. We talk a lot about that on the Well Woman Show, not apologizing and not using apologetic language so much. Nicolle, do you identify as a feminist?
I identify as an indigenous feminist, which is a different framework than the other kinds of feminism. For me, liberation as an indigenous woman doesn't mean I leave my home and stop working. Liberation as an indigenous woman means that I can still participate in community traditional activities alongside my working activities equally without discrimination. I feel like the Indigenous feminist framework addresses a lot of harm done to Indigenous women historically around identity and body and sexuality, trauma. And I've certainly used that framework for healing for myself because that is my history and my lineage. I come from 3 generations of sexual and physical violence in my family. And so being able to understand why those things happen and recognizing that I'm not a victim, nor am I a survivor, but rather an individual for this strong need to thrive and survive and be authentically who I was meant to be before the harm was done is kind of what I seek.
And it sounds to me, and maybe you can elaborate on this, but it sounds to me that you're actually using the Indigenous feminist framework for your work now, for your birth center.
Yes. There is a lot of Native women who experience trauma and are re-traumatized as they become mothers. And so working with them in a way that understands their history and respects who they are at that time, not pushing a healing framework that they're not ready to accept, is really paramount, and to building trusting relationships with them. I mean, ultimately, it's their end goal to be whoever they are striving to be through their pregnancy and their mothering. And there's already a lot of criticism in our societies about what kind of women we have to be or should be or be ashamed to be. And so, again, it's supporting women to be themselves on their terms.
Yeah. Okay, final question for you. What are you reading right now? What's on your nightstand?
I'm actually reading several books, but right in front of me I have this one called We Are Dancing for You. It's a Native feminism and the revitalization of women's coming of age ceremonies by Kucha Risling Baldi.
Okay. We'll definitely link to that in the show notes. We always link to people's book recommendations. And so it's called We Are Dancing for You. I can look that up.
Yeah. Yeah, I read a lot of books. I like to read. But really, the scholarship of Indigenous feminism is probably one of my favorite topics.
I love it. Okay. I'm writing it down. Nicolle, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. I want to thank you for being on the program.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
That's it for our show today. Remember, if you need support to live your Well Woman life, head over to wellwomanlife.com/Facebook to join us. Our monthly live event, Well Woman Drinks, brings women together to share our successes and challenges as women, leaders, moms, aunts, sisters, and all the other roles we carry. If you'd like to attend a Well Woman Drinks near you, or if there isn't one in your city yet and you'd like to start one, email info@wellwomanlife.com. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and subscribe in iTunes and leave a review. This helps raise visibility, which is super helpful when it comes to producing the show every week. For feedback, comments, or just to let me know you were listening today, find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @WellWomanLife. I'm Giovanna Rossi for The Well Woman Show. Until next time, have a super powerful week.